Bismillah Rahman Rahim 5090 O-Level Biology November 2017. This is the second video of the question paper 1-1, and we're going to discuss question 22 to 40. Now question 22. Which statement describes the pupil reflex in bright light? A pupil reflex in bright light means what is going to happen is that in the eye you have the pupil, but surrounding the pupil is the circular muscles of the iris and also the radial muscles of the iris. Now what have they said is describe the pupil reflex in bright light. So circular muscles will contract, pupil constricts, and the radial muscles will relax. So we're not going to talk about the lens. The lens has nothing to do with bright light. So that's why these two were totally not required. So but the answers were 1, 6, 9, 2, 5, 10, 3, 7, 10, and 4, 8, 9. And the answer was C, because these were the three answers that was really meaning sense in the pupil reflex. Then where are receptors found? The receptors are found like in the skin. You have temperature receptors and pressure receptors, and then these carry down, and these are the sensory neurons. So you touch something hot, receptors in the skin are stimulated, and sensory neurons carry the impulses to the spinal cord, and then the information goes to the brain. Then question 24. Which structures does not have Which structure does not have its muscles arranged antagonistically? Now, this is again given in the exam report. So I will mark it with a star so that you remember it, that this is an exam report and a difficult question. So the structure which does not have muscles arranged antagonistically, iris has circular and radial muscles of the iris. Esophagus has circular and radial. Biceps, upper arm has biceps and triceps, so they are antagonistic muscles. But the heart ventricle doesn't have antagonistic muscles. Atria contract, blood goes into the ventricle. So atria, ventricle, that's two different things, just not the ventricle. The heart ventricle does not have antagonistic muscles. So this is what you had to understand in question 24. Question 25 again is mentioned in the exam report. When a mother smokes during pregnancy, the oxygen supplied to the fetus is reduced. So if there's a woman who's pregnant and she smokes, the oxygen supply to the fetus is reduced. Which row shows how components of tobacco smoke cause this? Now it says in question 25, a common misconception was that the tar in cigarette smoke causes constriction of blood vessels. Sorry, tar causes mutation. So this is what you have to understand, was that tar cannot be causing vasoconstriction. So which row shows how the components? So number one, carbon monoxide combines with hemoglobin, and the constriction is because of nicotine, not because of tar. So constriction of blood vessels in the umbilical cord will result in less blood. So less blood flowing through them, so less oxygen diffusing. So this is what you have to understand. Carbon dioxide combining with hemoglobin to form carboxyhemoglobin, which then of course results in less oxygen carrying capacity of the mother's blood. So please understand the question before you sort of even think about the MCQ. Then coming on to question 26, how do bacteria change milk into yogurt? Because it's the lactic acid which then coagulates the milk protein casein. So it's the lactic acid which you have to understand. So question 26, then question 27, two containers X and Y were filled with equal amounts of dough mixture for baking bread. The mixture in Y had yeast in it. So this one had yeast in it. The containers they left in a warm place for 2 hours. The diagram shows their appearance after this time, after 2 hours. Dough mixture without yeast is just does not have, there's no carbon dioxide, so it hasn't risen. Dough mixture with the yeast is now full and is coming out of the beaker. Which substance produced by the yeast causes the difference between container X and Y? This one did not have any yeast, so what it had produced was carbon dioxide, which makes the dough rise. It's a very simple question. Which produced by the yeast causes the difference? Because one, the dough had risen and is nearly filling the whole beaker and it's coming out of the beaker, while the other one is just pathetically, doesn't have, the dough is just flying there. There's no change in the dough mixture. Again, question 28 was very, very difficult. Which statement describes relationships in ecosystems? Carbohydrates are passed from decomposers to producers. Carbohydrates decomposers, well, no, doesn't make sense. Energy is passed from carnivore to herbivore. It's the other way around, herbivore to carnivore. Protein are from primary consumer to producer. Sorry, its producer is first and then primary consumer. And of course, then only by even a method of elimination, you could have come up with the D answer. Water is passed from respiring decomposers to producers. Then coming on to question number 29, the diagram shows a food chain. Grass, rabbit, fox, flea. Flea is the parasite. So that has to be a bigger box at the top. Now the two bigger boxes were either this or this. Now this is wrong. This is of course wrong. This is wrong. But why is it wrong? Because you had grass. So this would be let me just give it a different color. So then if I say this was the grass, so this was the grass. This grass is in large numbers because it's a pyramid of numbers. So the grass plant wouldn't be one plant, it would be many plants. And on those, of course, we would be having the rabbits. So these would be a number of rabbits. So grass would probably 100 plants, and then maybe we have 10 rabbits eating it. And then we have maybe one fox. So this is the fox. And then we have the fleas. Fleas are the ones which are the parasites, and they would be in large numbers, just like somebody has lice in their hair. So large number of fleas. So that is how you had to understand this question. And the fleas could not have been less. This one was wrong because the fleas very little. The fleas numbers would be many. Of course, in mass they would be less, but in numbers they would be very high. Then coming on to question 30. In a fish tank, bacteria recycle animal waste for plants to use. The diagram shows some of the stages in the process: waste, compound 1 to compound 2, compound 2 to compound 3, and then that's available to the plants. What are compounds 1, 2, and 3? Ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates. Basically, the plants can only absorb nitrates, so three had to be nitrates. Compound 3 had to be nitrates because it's taken up by plants. So it could have been this or this, and then of course the compound 1 had to be ammonia. Ammonia to nitrites. This is nitrifying bacteria. If you just revise the nitrogen cycle, you would know that what you're talking about. So ammonia to nitrites, nitrites to nitrates. Question 31. The three statements about malarial parasites are listed. Insecticides are used to kill the vector. Yes, insecticides are used to kill the female Anopheles mosquito plus any mosquito. But of course, the female ones are the bad ones. They cause the disease. They are the vectors. They carry the disease from one person to another. Netting is used to keep the vectors away from people. If I sleep inside a mosquito net around my bed, well, I'm keeping the mosquitoes away from me. People take drugs that stop the malarial pathogen developing. If I take a medicine which will prevent, if any plasmodium even enters my system, then that is destroyed. So will prevent the malarial pathogen from developing. Which methods can be used to control malaria? 1, 2, and 3. All three are correct. Then coming on to question number 32. Now this is mentioned in the exam report. It says this was also difficult and was another occasion where candidates had to read the question carefully. The key concept was biodiversity, which is an example of direct action taken to maintain biodiversity. Culling elephants in a national park following a huge population increase. Yes, because too many elephants would be actually dangerous. All the vegetation would be trampled. So we have to actually, culling means human beings decide to kill these elephants. because their numbers have increased so much now that they are now dangerous, and they can they you see there are not enough plants on which they survive. So culling elephants would of course help to maintain biodiversity. The rest were all wrong. Growing feeds of planktons, overseeing the birth of a giant panda, researchers to discover possible drugs. So that's all nothing to do with biodiversity. Then coming on to question number 33, the diagram shows parts of a flower. Where must pollen land to pollinate the flower? You know that this is the stigma, this is the style, and this is the ovary. So this is something basic that you had to know. A was the anthers, and anthers is where the pollen is formed. But then that is when the pollen will burst and release, then the pollen will come here and land here on the stigma. And B was the ovule where the female gamete is formed. And C was the ovary wall or the ovary. And D was the stigma, and the answer was D. During germination of a seed, which structure is the first to appear above the soil surface? You see, when you plant a seed, the first thing that grows is the radicle, and then the plumule grows upwards and then develops the leaves. First appear above, it has to be the plumule. The radicle, of course, our radicle will develop into our root. Sepals will develop much later on at the base of the flower, and testa is the seed coat. That has nothing to do with it. It can't appear above the soil. Question 35. The diagram shows a fetus in the uterus, and we have X where the placental vessels, blood vessels are there, and Y is the umbilical cord. Where is the concentration of oxygen highest? An artery at X, an artery at Y. Oh no, the umbilical artery carries deoxygenated blood. It's the pulmonary artery story. So the umbilical artery, the artery at Y, will carry deoxygenated blood. A vein at X will carry deoxygenated blood. A vein at Y will of course have oxygen, but it won't be the highest. It will be more in the mother's blood, in the placenta where the oxygen is diffusing in from the mother side. So that's why the answer was an artery at X. Question 36. In 2005, there were an estimated 2.3 million HIV related deaths worldwide. In 2011, so this is 2005, then 2011, there were an estimated 1.7 million HIV related deaths worldwide. So in 2005, 2.3 million. In 2011, 6 years later, there was a 1.7 million related deaths. So the number of deaths has decreased. What is not a possible cause for this trend? So that means the deaths have increased. So the factors which actually control it have become affected. So you see, increased use of condoms would prevent AIDS spreading from one person to the other. Increased access to antiretroviral drugs would help in treating these people. And increased screening and heat treatment of blood and blood products would ensure that nobody would get AIDS because of a blood transfusion of an infected blood. So, which is not a possible cause? Yes, increased sharing of needle for intravenous drug use would, of course, result in more chances of people with HIV passing it on to other people, and this would not be a possible cause for this trend of decrease in deaths. So, it's more of checking you how well you can understand and read English. It doesn't check much of biology. Question 37. A gene is a unit of inheritance that controls the production of a protein. Gene is This is something very factual. Gene is a unit of inheritance, and it actually dictates how that protein should be made. It's just like the recipe to make a protein, like you have a recipe to make a chocolate cake. So this is the recipe to make a protein. Then let's come to question number 38. The gene for insulin production can be removed from human pancreatic cells and added to the genetic material of a harmless bacterium. What would be the next stage in using this process to treat diabetes? Put the bacterium into a fermenter to multiply rapidly and produce insulin. So they gave you this first step. It says the gene for insulin can be removed from human cells and then added to genetic material of a bacterium. So you've added it to the plasmid. And you've got this inside the bacteria. Now, what do you need to do? Now, you need to identify these bacteria and then put them in a fermenter to multiply rapidly so that they can produce more and more insulin. Then coming on to question number 39, this was, of course, another question which is mentioned, challenging genetic question. And it was only answered correctly by the strongest candidate. Now, this is exactly what they're going to do, make you a few questions which are very, very tough. Okay, now, question 39, let's handle that very carefully. There's a way how you do these questions. Question number 39. Earlobes can either be attached to the cheek or free. The characteristic is controlled by a single gene. The allele for attached is recessive. Now, this is the one which is the clue. So, let's look at the key. Which one are the people who are attached? Now, if they are recessive, they have to be this A, this A. You can write anything, B or anything, but I'm just taking the letters A. So these people would all be recessive. So this person is recessive, this person is recessive, this person is recessive. And 6 is recessive. So 6 and 9 are recessive. And they're homozygous recessive. But if you have a recessive trait, well, you have to be homozygous recessive. Only then you can show the recessive trait. The others people can be either this or they can be this. So we don't know what they are, the males and the females. All these people, males and the females, can either be this or this. Now, you have to understand is that 6 is the child of 1 and 2. So that means 1 and 2 have to have, because they are normal, so they have to be, they can't be big A because they have a child who has small a. So this small a has come from one parent and this small a has come from the other parent. So 1 and 2 have to be heterozygous. Now, the diagram shows the inheritance of earlobe attachment in one family. Which two individuals must be heterozygous for earlobe attachment? Now you know another thing is that parent 6 is small a, small a. So all his children have, one has come from this, one has come in this, and one has come in this. Now the other one has to come from 7, and 7 is free earlobe. So this 7 has to be big A, small a. Why? Because, let's look at it once again. Now if you look at the diagram again, this one has to be, 6 has to be small a, small a. 6 is definitely small a, small a. Because what? They are male with attached earlobe. And 9 is a male small a, small a. So the small a, one small a has to come from here and one small a has to come from the other parent, which is parent 7. So that is why the answer was 1 and 7. 1 and 7 have to be heterozygous. Heterozygous means big A, small a. This is homozygous dominant. No, they're not asking you that. They're saying which two individuals must be heterozygous. So 1 and 7. 1 and 7 must be heterozygous. So please understand that. That's a difficult question. Definitely an easy question. 40. The table shows the genotypes and phenotypes for hair color for the members of the family, but one phenotype is shown incorrectly. Now let's look at the mother. Mother is big A, small a, and she's brown. So that means brown is either big A, or big A, small a. So let's look at all the browns. Browns are all big A, another brown, big A, brown, big A, small a. But the blondes are the other ones. So the blondes have to be what? The blondes have to be small a, small a. But then here, this is the wrong blonde because he has a big A, small a. So son 1 was the answer. Which family member has the incorrect phenotype? Then this blonde is written wrongly. This should have been written brown. So it has the incorrect phenotype because as we've seen, big A, small a is brown. Big A is brown. So basically brown, this was wrongly written because the person in son 1 has big A, small a. Why is it been written blonde? So the blonde was the wrong phenotype. So please understand this, why Sun 1 was the correct answer to this. Then let's look at the exam report, question 24. Most candidates understood that they were antagonistic muscles in the arm, but few realized that this enlargement of muscle also occurs in the iris and in the esophagus. Question 25. A common misconception was that the tar in cigarette smoke causes constriction of blood vessels. Wrong. Question 28. The question on the ecosystem proved to be difficult, with a relatively small proportion of candidates choosing the correct answer. Question 32. This was also difficult and was another occasion where candidates had to read the question carefully. The key concept was biodiversity. Question 38. Genetic engineering is poorly understood by many candidates, and a significant proportion of candidates thought that GM bacteria are themselves injected into the diabetes patient. That was wrong. Question 39. This was a challenging genetics question and was only answered correctly by the strongest candidates. So this was going to be the question which was going to decide your grade, because they were only possible by the children who had a good concept of biology. Now that finishes this video. Thank you very much, and this completes the video, and we have finished question 22 to 40. Thank you.